us for the discussion over my garden of 1,000 bees and how we can connect those bees back to our local mid-Missouri area and learn a little bit more about our pollinators. My name is Michelle Woolbright, and I work for Boone County as a stormwater educator. And my connection with bees is ever growing. I've always loved them, but I'm always wanting to learn how I can make my home a healthier habitat for them with rain gardens and other things such as that.
I'm Lynn Hooper. I'm the urban hydrologist for the county, and like Michelle, I've been on a journey to learn more about native plants and the benefits that they provide, and learning about pollinators is a big part of that journey.
Josh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hello, I'm Josh Klostermann. Currently, I'm a PhD student at University of Missouri in Debbie Finke's lab. And I study like the community ecology of bees and wasps. And I'm really interested in how disturbances like in the landscape, like a bison running around or just disturbances, things like erosion, wind, things like that, how they affect bee communities and how habitat restoration also affects bee communities. Yeah, that's it.
Nancy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Me? Oh, hi, I'm Nancy Giofre. I own a small company in Millersburg, Missouri. It's Giofre Apiaries Honey Ice Cream. We keep honeybees. I've got around 115, I'll say 130 hives that we manage in 5 counties. And we make honey ice cream.
The insurance. You're supposed to housey lousy around. Right. That's what seems too difficult to understand to me. You know what?
All right.
Yeah.
So if you're if everyone wouldn't mind keeping their cameras and microphones turned off for right now, just so that would make the recording process easier for the future. All right. Danielle, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Danielle Fox. I'm the community conservationist for the city of Columbia, and I'm an avid native landscaper, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you all.
Yes, and if you guys have any questions or anything like that, again, the chat feature should be functioning well for you all, and we'll have people monitoring that. So feel free, it should be in the top portion, and any questions or anything that comes up, please enter to that. So to start off, I kind of wanted to ask a question to all of you all that many people are afraid of bees and have kind of a fear factor with them. Do you guys have any tips or ideas of how to make people more comfortable with bees or yourself to make them more comfortable in the environment when you're around them?
Well, if folks come and look at my beehives in my yard, I'll usually grab a little bit of honey and put it on my finger and let the bee land on it, and they'll sit there and eat that honey up for quite a while. And you know, bees are clumsy. They didn't mean to fly into you, and they probably didn't want to sting you because the sting kills them when they sting you. But yeah, it's really not they're not out to get you. They just kind of run into you. They're just kind of clumsy like that.
I think like also having somewhat of an understanding of like the life history of bees and like what their life cycle is like, and how most bees are solitary species. They don't form hives, and because of that, individual bees are going out collecting a resource and then bringing it back to their nest. And once you have that understanding, it makes it a lot easier to realize that those bees that don't look like honeybees aren't going to bother you because they're so busy doing what they need to do. They're so preoccupied with building a nest and foraging pollen that they're not going to go out of their way to sting you. But with social species like honeybees and hornets, closely related wasps to bees, they have a complex society that has members in it devoted to guarding a nest. and if you provoke the nest, then you'll get stung by them. So having that like understanding of who is who and what they're doing, I think helps a lot. Like you could stand in an aggregation of solitary bees and they'll just be all buzzing by you and nothing's gonna happen. So I think that helps me.
Very good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I
makes sense.
definitely mirror what Josh said. Then also, like I have a toddler and she went through a phase where she wanted to pet the bees. And I asked her, would you pet a raccoon? Like they're a wild animal, let them do their thing, leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone.
Yeah, another thing too is half of the bees that are out there most of the time are males, and male bees don't have stingers. So if it's kind of a fun party trick if you can like recognize what a male bee looks like, you can kind of just pick them up and like show them to people.
That creates another question for him. What's a male bee look like? What's female bee look like? What?
Yeah.
Awesome. And so we work with quite a bit with, thank you. I like those answers a lot. We work a lot with stormwater, and so we kind of thought that'd be kind of interesting talking about how bees and water are connected. If you'd like to give a little connection factor there.
I have
Lynn.
reached out to the entomology department over at the university looking for somebody to be a panelist, and the response I got was, "Oh, you're venturing away from aquatics." And I was like, well, yeah, have been for quite a while. So what on earth do bees have to do with water quality? Well, in my mind, a lot. And it really started for us because we started thinking about some of the local streams that we've got on the 303D list. And we've got stormwater runoff that's picking up pollutants on the landscape and delivering them into the streams. And so we had come up with sort of our slogan, you know, slow it down, spread it out, soak it up. And we started learning about native plants and how they were more deep rooted and how they really helped with water infiltration, improving water quality. And from there, we sort of ventured into regenerative and conservation agriculture practices and learning about how you can reduce inputs. And lo and behold, those things are really beneficial for bees and other pollinators and other beneficial insects. So here we are, and we're very interested in bees, and that's kind of how we got there. And that was just kind of something that we sort of wanted to cover because here we are as water quality folks talking about a movie about bees.
Yeah, and so I think it's also how do we make people more comfortable not only with the bees, and I think going off of that, like you're talking about with touching, like having people connect to them, and so this is kind of, we thought this as a way of you all presenting, helping people connect more with bees and understanding that would be a good way to connect people to the environment as a whole. And so I guess one of the questions we received ahead of time was if the presence of these different plants around streams can help be a good resource for the bees, and how Danielle, or feel free for others to jump in as well, if there's different plants that you could plant along a stream to help provide habitat for bees.
Well, I couldn't. I mean, I could list some plants that like that moist environment, and you know, you've got your shrubs, your buttonbush, your trees, your different willows, and of course all the different grasses and wildflowers. But really, you need to look into you know, it's not just riparian, but what's your soil type? You know, right plant, right place, and so when I really think about how important riparian corridors are to wildlife is that they create habitat corridors. So in Colombia, we have a stream buffer ordinance. So you're not allowed to develop within so many feet of a stream, and it varies by the type of stream. And so what that's done is if you look on the map, you see that there's a swath of habitat just linked through the city by all these different streams. So what we're finding now is that that habitat isn't such high quality because people have lawns instead of native plants. So if you just put in a 10 by 10 native garden, that's a great step towards creating some habitat, some stopover space for those bees that are traveling through that corridor.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Any sort of like native vegetation on the landscape in place of like a plant that is kind of like inert or like not providing much, like a lawn, is totally. Yeah. But in like regards to like riparian zones being important for bees, wetlands are super important for pollinator communities, and some species are wetland obligate, meaning that they need wetlands in order to survive. And it makes a lot of sense because all these plants are getting like their nutrients and energy from the sun and the water. And when it rains, these or when it doesn't, when there's a drought, these areas that have perennial water are going to be like feeding the plants water to make nectar. In areas where there's no water, those plants are going to be very dry with no nectar, and bees aren't going to be going to them because those plants are not producing like the resources that the bees need. So any area that has perennial water is extremely important for bee species because in times of drought, those areas have plants that contain nectar.
Yeah. Awesome. I guess going off of that kind of your answer kind of segues really well into this might be more directed at you, Nancy. But with this last year, we've had quite a bit of a drought in this area where we didn't have a lot of rain for a long time. How did you provide for your apiary bees, the bees that are honeybees? How did you provide water sources for those bees during this time? Did that cause a challenge for you during this last year?
Well, I didn't do much for them. A lot of my bees have bodies of water around them. They can get water off the edge of the pond or whatever. Hope they don't drown. But I didn't do much for them. I didn't. Where it hurts me as a business person, I guess, is I don't harvest as much honey as what could be. When it's hot, the bees use water to cool their hives, so that's probably a little bit of an issue too for them. So yeah, I just didn't pull very much honey, and basically when it's hot, when I'm hot, they're hot, and I just kind of let them be.
Yeah. Is that something for some native bee pollinators and stuff like that, where you guys have to worry about alternative water sources, or is it kind of more just create an appropriate environment?
Creating an environment, giving wet pools, water your lawn, water something, and the bees will get to the wet spots. I've seen them in mulch piles, just sucking up the wet water, the wetness out of the ground, which is beneficial for them, better than just a pool of water.
Yeah.
And some plants that grow out here, volunteer, they're kind of drought resistant, so that helps too. So a lot of native Missouri plants are okay in a drought.
Yeah, that's a good point to add. I know in the movie, they had the plants are different because it was in England, some than what we have around here. And I know that they talked about, I think that was kind of a good example of a disturbed area backyard that had probably been once upon a time turf, and then he created this bee city of different logs and other things like that. And things that have been most of, like, say, for example, my yard, where it's been disturbed over the last 100 years or things like that. Have you found any beneficial ways, Josh, to help kind of bridge that gap of a disturbed area? I know each disturbance is so different. So I know you've said that you've studied some about different disturbances. And so I didn't, do you have any tips or suggestions for people wanting to make a big switch?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of how to orient myself. Yeah, so historically there were lots and lots of disturbances on the landscape that are no longer here. Some of those things would be like the very small scale disturbance of a mammal, like let's say like when there were elk around here and wolf and things like that, there was vegetation being ripped up from the behaviors of these larger mammals, and that would create spaces of bare ground in the landscape. And a lot of these bee species need, bee and wasp need spaces of bare ground in order to like, or find those types of spaces preferable for nesting. So if those spaces aren't there, then bees will not disperse to a new place. So you need to create a nesting environment that is favorable to as many bees as possible. And you can do that like in so many different ways. And I think that just looking at that guy's backyard in that movie is a good example. He has all these different types of nesting habitat. He has those boxes with the holes in it. He has logs with holes drilled in them. He has boxes that are covered from rain. He has boxes that are made of like clay, adobe, kind of like soil wall, and he has all these spaces in his backyard that are like little micro habitats that each are different enough for different species of bees to exploit them, and certain spaces are going to be better for certain bees. So creating as many different micro habitats as you can in your space is my recommendation.
I'd say a really easy way to do that is to just leave the leaves. Stop raking.
Yep.
Leave them be. Just let them stay. And that it not only creates habitat, but it also maintains a lot of moisture in those dry periods. So you're, double whammy. You got somewhere to live and something to drink if you're a bee.
Is there any other, I mean, I think that we've seen kind of, the temperature variations, the droughts, the heavy precipitation. Is there any resilience tips that you might have for creating a better, safer ecosystem for pollinators as a whole?
Just from a climate resiliency perspective, like anytime you can create more biodiversity in an area, that is our number one defense against climate change. And because we can't really manage for, the growing season's changing. We can't make flowers bloom later and bees wake up sooner. So, create as much biodiversity as possible. Let those things through evolution do their thing, adapt, and eventually we'll find that balance once more. We won't, but several generations from now.
Is there anything that you do with your hives, Nancy, that to make sure that they are able to handle warm summers, or are there any tips that you have for people?
Make sure they have afternoon shade. I started beekeeping in 2009, and I was pretty much put them in full sun back then, and then I found it got pretty hot, and I gradually started putting them with western shade trees up against that, and so they'd get the first early morning sun, but they'd have from like the peak of the day, 3 o'clock, they're almost shaded. That seems to help them a lot, give them a chance to cool down in the evening. Yeah, and as it gets hotter, I lean more towards that. We have hive beetles, or a honeybee pest, and that's what the full sun helps with, keeping them under control. but it's more, I find it more important to give the bees some shade. It's more beneficial for them. And I've changed bottom boards too that also help me, I feel, help with the hive beetles. So, but that's has nothing to do with that. But yeah, afternoon shade, and also the trees, give them a winter break too from the western cold. It's very helpful. Yep, that's kind of my strict adherence that afternoon shade for sure. Yep.
I'm sorry, I don't know why. I think it's our team system. Your pictures are fuzzy, so I apologize for that. But I can hear you guys great. But yeah. Is there any other for native bees? Is that you just more worried about the creating? So I guess I'll go on to a different question. So I guess bees are often a focus of the pollinator discussions. Are there other pollinators that you think that maybe should get a little spotlight while we're talking about them? Josh, is there anyone in particular you want to inform us about?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things that pollinate plants. Flies are a big one of them. There's the flower flies that are known, especially like the hairier species of flower flies, they're known to pollinate some plants. But like there's plants in the landscape like pawpaw that are completely fly pollinated or non-bee pollinated. So those plants need things other than bees. But I really am a big fan of wasps, and wasps can help bees in a very indirect way, I think, by keeping their communities kind of in check. So wasps, while they may not always be good pollinators, they're hunting prey items. They're like bees' cousin. Instead of going and collecting pollen and bringing it back to a nest, they're going and collecting prey and bringing it back to a nest. And depending on what wasp you're looking at, it's going to be bringing back a different prey item. And those prey that it could be bringing back can negatively impact bees. So through providing habitat for wasps, even though they're not necessarily good pollinators in comparison to bees, you can still be helping bees by attracting wasps.
Huh, did not know that. Pretty cool. Is there any other pollinators you'd like to highlight, Danielle?
I mean, you've got the monarch butterfly, all the butterflies, ants. People don't usually think about it, but ants pollinate as well. Beetles, lots of different beetles. They're all super important. And yeah, that's why I am a firm believer in just creating all that biodiversity you can, those micro habitats. It's really easy. I fill up my bird bath and I put tiny rocks in it so that the bees have a spot to land and drink water in the summertime. You can kill all your lawn and then rake back some leaves to show some bare soil, rough it up with a rake, make it a little softer for them. There's simple things you can do all around your home in your own yard to create awesome habitat, like the gentleman in the movie.
Yeah, great. So I guess going off of that, whenever for the people who are just getting started, they have maybe had, there could be, and also if you guys are long-term users and want to add pollinator creators and want to add questions, feel free to again add those to the chat. But one of our questions that we got ahead of time was, do you recommend planting for to get people started? Do you recommend starting with a couple of plants or starting with a multitude for a specific bee, or just planting a variety of pollinator plants?
So native plants, because they're not bred by humans, they have certain periods where they bloom. So you want to make sure you have something that's blooming in the spring, in the summer, and then in the fall. So just by default, following that rule, you're going to have many different species. Your asters and your sunflowers, those bloom much later. You have your things like your different milkweed species, at least in Missouri, your blazing stars. those are going to be kind of a midsummer bloom. And then you have your early, your spring ephemerals, the spring beauty, the all the Dutchman's vine, all the different species. And so just by default, you're gonna have a lot of different plants. I also get crazy and love diversity. So I'm a huge proponent for planting many different things, but there is also value in having several of the same species in the same area. And I'm sure Josh could talk more about the different bees that I guess they forage more efficiently from going from the same species of flower. You know, Josh, why don't you pick that up there? I'm not the bee expert.
Oh, it's good. You're killing it. Yeah, well, I mean, some bees are like specialist species. Others are generalized. So generalist species are going to take pollen and nectar from a large variety of different plants. Specialist bees are going to take pollen from one group of plants or even one species of plant. So there's a lot of different specialist bees around here, but I feel like if you follow what you were just saying, Danielle, and plant a whole bunch of stuff that spreads the whole growing season, in that mix you're going to have plants like goldenrod and asters that are going to be specialist plants for some bees. So I really like that the idea of planting for an entire growing season instead of just for spring, summer, or early fall. But also going out and like looking at what's around in your immediate environment. So like what plants are persisting in the crumbs of habitat that are left around you, because those plants are the ones that are being visited by the plants that will probably go to your backyard, or are being visited by the bees that will probably go in your backyard if you plant those plants. So under like seeing what's around and maybe even collecting seed and trying to grow from seed.
Yeah. Do you
Seed
have
collecting, very effective.
what'd you say, Nancy?
Seed collecting, if anybody has time to do that, it's really effective. I started a little plot, probably about 20 feet round circle at my mother-in-law's patch, and yeah, it's I just threw seeds in from all kinds of harvesting on our own, and it's really cool. It comes up, you know, you get your spring flowers, then we'll get the blazing stars, and then fall we'll have it'll be full of yellow whatever sunflowers and stuff. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun too.
And so where would you guys suggest people to find more information on native plants and what seasons they grow? What is it? There's Grow Native. Do you guys have any other good resources people should, or suggestions for resources?
Conservation Department.
Yeah.
Missouri Department of Conservation. But
And I will include a list and I'll send out a follow email. But yeah, Grow Native is one that I normally like to recommend for people. What were you saying, Danielle, as well? I think.
Oh, there's tons of books out there, and I really like Heather Holmes' book. This one is Pollinators of Native Plants, and so she's making that connection between what insects are pollinating certain plants. And so if you want to see a certain insect, here's the plant that you should put in. And you know, Josh's idea of going around town and seeing what's close to you and collecting seed from there. Check out your parks. We have a lot of native garden plots in our parks, and you can collect seed. Don't be digging up plants, but you can collect seed. So there's tons of literature out there. Grownative.org, they have a native plant resource. They have a resource guide, which isn't so much about the plants, but where you can buy them, all the different landscapers, and this is across Missouri. But they also have a native plant database where you can filter in what sort of conditions you've got, full sun, clay soils, and up pops a list of native plants that would or should grow there.
Yeah, I'm iNaturalist person, so I like taking pictures of things and uploading them online. And iNaturalist is a cool resource because people will come by that may be experts in that group of plants, and they'll identify the plant that you take the picture of and put on the website. So I think that that's a really a very cool learning resource for just learning what is around you if you don't know how to go about like looking up like in a flora, like, oh, I saw this cool yellow flower in the wood lot next door. I don't even know how to go about finding out what it is. iNaturalist lets you take a picture of that and upload it and have someone else identify it for you. So I think that that's a very good and useful learning tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually been a good source too for researchers finding out what is in different areas as well, isn't it? There's kind of proven some tidbits wrong about things that grow in places people didn't know and live.
Yeah, it's like a super cool citizen science outlet where lots of discoveries are being made by people who just take pictures.
So, yeah,
I'd like to say, let's not forget about trees too. The maples are they're great sources of pollen for honeybees in the spring.
Yeah, and I see tons of mason bees on like red maple and silver maple blooms. Like the really pretty blue one, it's called Osmia lignaria, the blue orchard mason bee. And that was all over on Mizzou's campus on their ornamental maples early spring.
Mm-hmm.
one of our questions we got ahead of time too was what native flowers do mason bees prefer? So more than maple trees, do you guys have any other suggestions for people wanting to provide food resources for mason bees?
Milkweed. Milkweed's really easy to grow, and it's yeah, kind of popular, and a lot of insects like it, including butterflies, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been amazing to see downtown where the milkweed has gone from just the pollinator in front of the city hall to now I'll see it popping up all throughout downtown now. It's an amazing plant.
Sedum, it grows real well. I don't think it's native, but it's very popular with a lot of insects.
Any of like the native plants in the pea family. So the plant family is called Fabaceae, Fabaceae, whatever. E.
Too technical.
Yeah. Anything in that plant family that's native, I always see lit up with bees in the family that the mason bees are in. So any of like I'm trying to think of examples right now off the top of my head, like
Partridge pea.
yeah, partridge pea, wild blue indigo, American hognut, yeah, or groundnut, American groundnut. Anything in the pea family is my recommendation.
And, you know, what's really awesome is that a lot of our early blooming trees that we have, like wild plum, the red bud, those are some of the first food resources that our native bees have. And so there's tons of red buds everywhere, but wild plum is not only awesome for bees, but you eventually get fruit out of it too. So.
Yep. Wild cherry, they're great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any prunus. And, you know, if anybody's familiar with Doug Tallamy's research, so there is a hierarchy in the value of trees and other plants as to how important they are for a great majority of insects. So like oaks, he found that, you know, over 500 species of Lepidoptera, so moths, butterflies, and skippers rely on just oaks. And I think like prunus, like wild cherry, wild plum, there's in the 400s. So trees are hugely important. And in a city, especially, because they're not only providing habitat and food, but they're also providing shade, which with our urban heat and that urban heat island effect, trees are becoming crucially important for reducing the impacts of climate change within the city.
Yeah.
Yeah, and lots of bees nest in the twigs of trees too. Like they excavate the pith on the inside of like a twig and they'll nest inside. So like when like a branch gets down from whatever, like a disturbance, like a wind disturbance, there's an opening of pith and then a bee can nest inside of there. So just think of all like the ends of a tree that are open to bee nests when they get mature.
And they'll do that in your like sunflower stalks too. So I have, it's not a sunflower, but Joe Pye weed. So it's a big thick stalk, and you know, I cut the head off of it, and I got to watch a bee just drill down in it. All the fluff was just flying everywhere, and he was just going to town. It's really fun to watch, and if you've got kids, it's a great entertainment, but also very awesome to have on your own in your own backyard.
Mhm.
Wonderful. And I think Lindsay submitted the question, and I think that she brings up a good point of, in my mind, she's wondering, are clovers as a lawn kind of a good first step of changing from turf lawn? If you start incorporating the use of clover into it, I could see the idea of tearing out your whole yard and changing it to something that you might be best done in incremental steps versus for a better sense of success. What are you guys' thought of the use of clover?
My honeybees love clover.
It's better than
Yeah.
bluegrass.
Yes.
I rarely recommend that anyone dig up their entire yard all at once. Do it in small steps. Get out of here, cat. And you know, so for myself, I smother a section of yard and plant a native garden. And just over the years, I've done that in different areas. So now we have little trails of patches of turf that we use, or we leave an open area for the dog. You know, plan it out. Clover is great. It's not too tall. So in Colombia, we still are restricted by it's the native or the landscape management ordinance. It was a weeds ordinance, which was very strict. You basically could not have native plants in your yard. That's not the case anymore. Clover is in kind of that sweet spot where it would be considered a monoculture, but it doesn't exactly reach 12 inches, so you should be okay.
I find if you cut the grass really short, you'll get clover to come up. If it's in the ground, it'll come up. Otherwise, if you don't want dandelions and all that, you cut your grass tall. But yeah, I find the shorter you cut it, the more stuff comes up.
And then once the clover starts to form, do you leave it longer after that point, or is it do you just continually cut it shorter? Or...
Well, when the flowers dry up, then you'll cut it and it'll come back again. Out in our you get fresh clover every, I don't know, month and a half or so. It just keeps free flowering. The short stuff. There's also the yellow clover and 3-foot tall clover that we get in our roadsides, creek beds and stuff. That's the stuff. But I don't know if anybody wants 3-foot tall clovers in their yard. We do, but
so how, whenever you're creating these new spaces, how do you often smother the old or the existing landscape? Do you have any suggestions of how to... I've heard using cardboard as a better mechanism with mulch on top, so you don't kill off the fungus and the bugs and animals living in there. I don't know if that's
That's what I do. I weed eat it down to the dirt, and then I cover it with a thick layer of cardboard, then put a few inches of mulch on top of that. And then I just cut right through the cardboard and stick my plugs right in there, and wham, you got a garden.
Yeah, I would agree. I've done a very similar thing of using cardboard first, putting mulch on top of it, and then I sprinkled some seed like that I collected down, and yeah, did some plugs, and that worked pretty good for like I think in like a small spatial scale that works really, really well. If you try to like scale that up to like an entire like lawn, then it becomes really difficult to like make it look nice.
Yeah, start small, right? Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. That patch that I started at my mother-in-law's, I burned it, and it was 20 by 20, but I, wouldn't suggest that with the dry temperatures that we have these days.
Burning
So
is
yeah.
so important. Like that's a great topic to get into. Like that's one of those disturbances that opens up bare ground and like reinvigorates like plant growth and stuff like that. Again, people probably shouldn't. Like you said, people probably shouldn't just go and burn their lawn. But burning would be a great way of clearing a space for growing native plants.
Well, and dormant seeds can come up too from that, right? That
Yeah.
Stuff that's in the ground that gets choked out by the grass.
Yeah, burning was an important part of most of the North American landscape.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think that burning has really kind of started to get a momentum behind it when done appropriately. I know that there's a couple of organizations in town that have recently started a coalition of people who are interested in burning, because whenever you do it, you need a team of people and training and all of that, and not on windy, dry days. And so I didn't know if there's, if you guys have experience on small scale burnings in the city. I don't know if that's something that's allowed in the city on a appropriate scale, or
You have to get a permit from the fire department, and they will approve or deny your burn plan. For City of Columbia properties, we have recently entered into an agreement. So we have a ongoing contract. So when we need to burn an area, we can get it done. This is a new thing for us, and so it's very exciting. And I think even recently, one of our areas was burned. So expect to see more burning going on city public lands.
yeah, I know the Missouri Department of Conservation does yearly training about how to appropriately burn. And if you're doing that in the county, you do need to let the fire department know and always have a plan and hire help if you do not know how to do it. We just had a question come in about do you allow the drilled wood blocks to rot, or should they be replaced so often? I think that also goes into the question. I'm going to add a little layer to this question too about what type of wood in treated versus non-treated wood to be aware of. Someone wants to add that in too. So if you guys are wanting to create a little bee city of your own and drill holes into a wood, a log, I would say untreated wood
Would use
would be
untreated.
Untreated, yeah. And I would just let it rot. Like every log, every tree that's downed in a forest naturally is going to go through that succession of decay. And each stage of that decay of that wooden or that log is going to provide a microhabitat again for a different type of either bee or other type of insect beetle. So just leaving like those logs out, especially if you're just putting them in your yard for bee habitat, leaving them out and letting them rot is not going to do any harm. If anything, it's going to do. You're going to see some probably cool bugs going in them. But I will say though, with those mason bee homes that you can purchase that are like little houses with the tubes in them, those should be cleaned every year if you can do that. Parasites accumulate pretty readily in those types of environments, those like artificial nest boxes, and over a long period of time, there'll be negative impacts on the bees that you're attracting to your yard with that nesting habitat.
When should you clean them?
That's a good question. Well, so
Late spring?
if you bring
Summer?
them in the winter, then you have a lot of little bee cells that you have to deal with. And you'll have to keep them frozen or leave them outside in some sort of way where they'll just emerge with the following season, or springtime, emerge at springtime, or once they already emerge for the year. Once you have them out for a whole summer, bees nest in them, then that following spring they all leave. I would take it then, clear it out, and then put it back up for more bees to use at that growing season.
For your honeybees, Nancy, do you have to clean out the hives, or is that part of the honey production process?
Oh, no, I go through them every spring. I make splits and just check the overall condition of the hive. Yeah.
What'd you look for whenever you're looking for the condition?
See where there is some bees move up in their box in the wintertime, and that bottom box would most likely be empty, or if I get it to it early enough, if they're forced, they'll go back into it. But so I'll take that bottom box and put it on top of the bee cluster wherever they're housing. Check for worn out frames falling apart. Clean the bottom boards if necessary, especially if it's a solid bottom board. I clean out hive beetles like the nest in the bottom of the whatever the bees drop down. It's kind of the trash area for the honeybees and hive beetles, and will take up residence in there and feed on whatever the bees drop. So that gets cleaned out. Yeah. And then I'm looking for queen cells and seeing what brood's coming on, and gets pretty exciting and busy. And if I have dead outs, I bring those back to the shop, and the frames all get reworked, and I reuse the frames if they're good. And sometimes if the hive died in the fall and I didn't catch it, other insects will inhabit it for the winter. And, I let them go or whatever, deal with them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I have a couple of the house-shaped ones, and I need to appropriately clean them this spring.
Yeah, after everybody's hatched out, then you can go in and clean them. Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Like a pipe cleaner or something. Probably
Yeah. Yeah, they probably are full of fungus right now because I have not done that the last couple of years.
Fungus got to eat too.
That's true. So with like the recent research about different like fungicides and different lawn applications affecting bee larvae, do you guys know of any like messaging that can be given to people about how to maybe not use those things on their agricultural areas and lawns? Sorry, it's kind of a switch of questions right there a little suddenly. But we had a question about fungicide use and effect on larvae. I don't know if there's any suggestions you guys might have about how to.
So the best practices is, avoid spraying during the bloom season, and when bees are most active, if possible. There's also, ways to make sure that when you spray, it's not moving, it's not volatilizing or anything like that from the area that you're spraying on. And based on what I've read, some mixtures of insecticides and fungicides combined can be an even greater risk to pollinators. So avoiding mixing those, and that would require a little more research.
Yeah.
That's usually what I tell people, if they'll if they can hold off on the fungicide till after the blooms are done. The bees most likely won't be on those trees. And I'm really only have bees in one orchard right now, active orchard. And that orchard owner was very considerate of the bees, and we worked together on it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that both of you have said. Yeah, this is like a sticky question. I mean, food production is an important thing, and like it's hard to say like you can't use this chemical that's going to increase your yield because it's going to hurt bees. So I don't know. This question is just like it kind of really. I think it's very nuanced and like it's like kind of a symptom of like a bigger problem of like our current agricultural system and how food is grown and our relationship to food, and how multi-billion-dollar industries are like intertwined with that, like chemical industries and ag industries, and like I don't really I think have like a besides what you all have both already said, I don't really have an answer. Maybe like a question of like how can we grow food in a not in a monoculture that's going to need all of these fungicides and insecticides in order to have a harvestable yield.
Support small local farmers.
Yeah,
That's, I think, one of the best things you can do to make that push.
I think that's a good answer to the question too.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think that we'll start kind of wrapping things up for everybody, but we have a final kind of, we might have time if anybody else wants a last second question, but for kind of our final question is beyond planting keystone species, what steps would you take next to have a big, you guys have kind of touched on these some, but take to make the most impact for our pollinators? What are some the steps everyone could take, like an achievable next step, take home message people should leave with today to help our bees all around?
Well, I always say get rid of your lawn and get your neighbors to do the same. But if you can't do that, at least, you can put a native plant in a pot on your porch. If you live in an apartment, I used to do that myself. There's all sorts of ways that you can garden with natives and be a part of that the ecosystem, I guess, more a part of. and so support your city and urge your city to make changes that benefit pollinators. So if you're not from Columbia, you can make some more pushes. So one thing that we've done in Columbia is instead of just mowing grass along roadsides, we're converting it to native pollinator habitat, and that's reducing, that's providing all the stormwater benefits that Lynn and Michelle were talking about earlier, as well as pollinator habitat, and it's reducing the amount of work and money that the city has to pay just to mow grass. And so it's good all around. Yeah, I guess I'll stop with that. I could go on forever.
Road ditches are a good feeding ground for my honeybees. They love it. And pesticides. I think people are listening and they've backed off on using a lot of pesticides. I think it's improved over the past 10 years. That or maybe I've gotten better at beekeeping. I'm not sure which, but the hives have been really great for us, growing wise. Yeah, just keep the flowers going. Let them dandelions grow a little bit. But if you got to cut them, people first. We want to be comfortable in our environment.
I'd say the preservation of land and the active preservation of land, and I don't mean just like state parks and conservation areas and such. I mean like the little crumbs that exist that you see on your drive to work. Those spaces are super important, and they're being kind of like those fallow fields are being gobbled up like at like such an incredible rate by developers. And those like spaces are where like the like remnants of a lot of populations of bees and wasps are. And I guess like in order to like make that happen, you have to, I think that like developing a respect and a connection like to the land and learning what is around, what is alive and around, only creates passionate people that then will become the ones that actually do something to preserve that land. So I think going out, looking at things, getting curious, those are all really important things that anybody can do to protect wildlife, period.
Need a bumper sticker that says I break for wildflowers, because I do that.
Nope. I break for little dashes of, of bees across my windshield. Yeah.
Yes.
Little blurry blobs.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's wonderful, and I think that you guys all have good messages to take home. I think the developing of the connections and making little steps where we can, connections makes things meaningful. And so I think I'd like to thank you all for helping us develop our connections with the bees more, and I learned a lot from your all's time. I'd like to thank everyone for attending as well. And I'll be sending out some resources. I'll be bothering you guys for that later, and sending out a recording of this as well. So if you guys have any final questions, there's a couple of thank yous coming in for you all. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great talking.
We'll see ya.
Thank you.
You got everything, Michelle?